This video was brought to you by Imprint. On Monday, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau claimed that there were, quote, credible allegations that the Indian state had been involved in the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Khalistan activist living in Canada who had previously advocated for an independent Sikh majority state in northern India. Unsurprisingly, the Indian government denied these allegations as, quote, absurd and motivated, and the two countries are now engaged in an escalating diplomatic spat, expelling each other's diplomats and accusing the other of interfering with one another's internal matters. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the assassination, the wider Khalistan separatist movement, and why this episode leaves the West with such a difficult dilemma. Before we start, if you want more information and analysis from TLDR, then we just announced our 28-page newspaper that summarizes all of 2023. There's a link to the announcement video and the store in the description, and pre-orders close on October 1st. So, let's start by taking a look at what happened to Hardeep Nijjar. On June 18th, two masked gunmen fatally shot Nijjar, who was inside his truck in the parking lot of his local Gurdwara in Surrey, a city about 30 kilometers east of Vancouver. Nijjar was a prominent Sikh activist who previously advocated for the creation of a separate Sikh majority state known as Khalistan in India's Punjab region. Now, before we get into this, we should say that this is a controversial subject and the Indian government are already trying to sue us for apparently misusing a map. So we should stress that we're not endorsing either side's case here or the idea of Khalistan. We're just trying to give a brief descriptive history of the Khalistan movement. Essentially, since basically the fall of the British Empire and the emergence of an independent Indian state, some of India's Sikh minority have called for the creation of a separate ethno-religious Sikh state, commonly known as Khalistan. Khalistani advocates were worried that with the dominance of Muslims in Pakistan and Hindus in India, Sikhs would struggle for their own political representation without their own separate polity, or at least some degree of autonomy from India. For context, Sikhs make up less than 2% of India's entire population, but are mostly concentrated in India's northern state of Punjab, where they make up a slight majority. Now, as with many informal separatist movements, the proposed boundaries of Khalistan vary somewhat. Some groups suggest just the western part of Indian Punjab. Others suggest the entirety of Punjab, while more expansive claims include Pakistani Punjab and other parts of northern India. Today, though, the version of Khalistan that you're most likely to see not only includes Indian Punjab, but a number of other regions too. Now, in fact, this is the Khalistan advocated by Sikhs for Justice, the main Khalistan separatist movement outside of India, which was banned by the Indian state in 2019. Anyway, Khalistan separatism wasn't a big issue for the Indian government until the 80s, when it began to militarize. Now, we're not going to get into the details here because it's super complicated, but a lot of this revolves around Operation Blue Star, an Indian armed forces operation in June 1984 to remove Sikh separatists from the Golden Temple, the holiest site of Sikhism, who have been using the temple as sort of their base for separatist activities. Now, in part because the Soviet KGB had been manufacturing evidence that the CIA and Pakistani intelligence services were supporting the separatists, by 1984 the Indian state had become very anxious about all of it, and decided to call in the army to dislodge the separatists. Originally, the army tried to only use light weaponry to avoid damage, but they ultimately underestimated how well armed the separatists were, and quickly resorted to using heavy arms, including tanks, helicopters, and artillery. In the end, the operation took 9 days, and only ended when the separatists ran out of ammunition. From the Indian Army's perspective, the operation had been a disaster. Thousands of Sikh civilians were killed, as well as a significant number of Indian soldiers, and the episode greatly exacerbated tensions between the Indian government and the Sikh community, spawning a violent Sikh separatist insurgency in Punjab. This violence ended up lasting for about a decade or so, before petering out in the 1990s for a variety of reasons, including factional infighting and a crackdown by security services. Worryingly for the Indian state, however, the movement has seen a bit of a resurgence in the last few years, fueled by worsening socioeconomic conditions in Punjab and a more activist Sikh diaspora. Anyway, Khalistan has been a long-standing point of tension between India and Canada, a country which has the largest Sikh population outside of India. And that's because many Sikhs and Khalistani activists emigrate to Canada, sometimes claiming political asylum. As the Indian government sees it, Canada allowed the Khalistani separatist movement to survive abroad once it was snuffed out in India. And the Indian government has raised this issue with Canada on a number of occasions. Most recently at last week's G20 summit, when Modi accused Trudeau of not doing enough to quell, quote, anti-India activities of extremist elements. And this is why when Nijjar was assassinated in June, fingers were immediately pointed at the Indian state. In the days after the assassination, Sikhs for Justice staged a rally outside the Toronto consulate, where they accused senior Indian diplomats in Canada of having a hand in the killing. For context, the Indian government has previously accused Nijjar of having links to the Khalistan Tiger Force, a violent Sikh militant group, and accused him of being responsible for a series of targeted killings inside India. In 2018, they even essentially asked Canada to hand over Nijjar, who lives in Canada, but nothing really happened. The Canadian police did briefly detain him a couple of months after India issued the extradition request, but released him within 24 hours without issuing any charges. Now, unsurprisingly, the Indian government has denied all allegations associated with his killing, and as such, Trudeau's recent comments have sparked a furious diplomatic row. Both countries have now expelled senior diplomats and have suspended negotiations on a Canada-India free trade deal. Ultimately, if it turns out that the Indian government did have nothing to do with the murder, then this will be an embarrassing faux pas for Trudeau, and yet more proof of the political power of the Sikh diaspora in Canada. If, however, it does turn out that the Indian government did have some role in the assassination, then this will leave not just Canada, but the West more generally with a difficult dilemma. Western governments will suddenly be under political pressure to take a tough line on this. After all, it's the assassination of someone that Trudeau described as a Canadian citizen by a foreign state on Canadian soil. But at the same time, the West, and especially America, are currently trying to improve their relations with India as sort of a counterbalance to China. Ultimately then, there seem to be some parallels here to what happened in 2018 with Saudi Arabia and Jamal Khashoggi, when the West had to decide whether they wanted to stand up for their values or their strategic interests. And it'll be interesting which one they prioritize this time round. It's obviously not an easy decision, and if this plays out, it'll be interesting which way they go. If, like everyone else, you also struggle with making decisions, then you might enjoy courses like the 5-second rule and a guide to overcoming self-doubt and indecision over on Imprint. Just like TLDR, Imprint is all about helping you learn quickly, conveniently, and visually. It's super quick because most of their lessons take less than 2 minutes to complete, summarizing knowledge from all kinds of topics and using Harvard professors and best-selling authors to teach you key concepts. It's convenient because it's all housed in their easy-to-use mobile app, letting you replace doom scrolling with actual learning. And it's visual because, well, look at it. Their animated explanations help you stay focused, understand concepts quickly, and actually retain what you learn. So join the millions of users learning with Imprint, including me. I'm taking their multi-day flow course right now. And do that by using the link in the description. Plus, if you use that link, you'll get a 7-day free trial and get 20% off an annual plan when you sign up. And they'll know that you came from us. So check out Imprint, support our new sponsor, and thanks for watching TLDR.